Of all the technologies powering modern games, there will always be a special place for id Tech, for its role laying the foundations for first-person shooters to pioneering cutting-edge 3D graphics of the day. It's always pushed technical boundaries. Of course, as an engine it's been rebuilt and iterated upon many times over the years, since the original Doom in 1993. This year though, well, we had id Tech 6 being used for the last time in Wolfenstein Youngblood, a co-op spin-off to the new Colossus. I covered it at length on PS4 and Xbox One systems already, a fine game that inherits the physically based rendering and superb lighting of its predecessor. All of that comes to Google Stadia, streaming to Chromecast, Android phones or Chrome browsers. It's a version I've spent the last few days testing and a release I had high hopes for. I say high hopes because Doom Eternal is coming to Stadia early 2020, using the newer form of id Tech 7. A few months to wait, yes, but Youngblood here gives us an early sample of how the engine, in an earlier form at least, translates to Google's 10.7 teraflop machines. How does it run then? And does it hold up to the likes of, say, Xbox One X in its visual quality when set to 4K? Let's find out. The biggest fear I had going into Wolfenstein Youngblood on Stadia really was for such a fast-paced shooter, the input latency on Stadia might be too high. The bottom line is, the game does have some input latency out of the box, but with Stadia we're adding around 44 milliseconds of latency to that. For a game that moves at such a rapid pace, with quick camera pans and slides across the ground, controls have to be as tight as possible. This is the hook after all. Low latency input has been a defining feature of id Tech games, certainly in the era of the original Doom and Quake. So it gives me very little joy to say that, well, there is an issue here. Here's an example of what I mean. Excuse the phone footage here, but hopefully it gives you an impression of what we're dealing with. I'm playing on my LG B8 OLED, using game mode of course to minimise the latency, with a Chromecast Ultra hooked up to it. The TV's rated at around 22 milliseconds of input lag, and the network I'm on is a 300 megabit per second fibre connection hooked via Ethernet. The status reads excellent on the Stadia menus too, and 4K is active. In other words, this is a pretty respectable use case. Even so, the gameplay here really is me trying my best to work with the controls. The delay is obvious from the first moment of action, from jumping to firing the gun. You press right on the stick and actual movement follows after the send and receive from Google servers. Now for some games, like Final Fantasy 15, the illusion kind of holds up. You believe the game is being played locally at least after a while of playing it. There's just not such a demand for quick reaction times there. For Wolfenstein, the core gameplay loop is sadly harmed by simply not being able to translate your intent to the screen easily. There's no question, it's a less enjoyable experience than PC, Xbox One or PS4, but this is the reality of streaming services. The promise of Stadia goes beyond that though. The benefits in performance and image quality next to current gen consoles could, to an extent, make up for it being streamed. Suppose we get best in class visuals and frame rates not possible on Xbox One X for example, that goes some way to justify these limits. So a quick side by side here, Stadia left and X right. The turnout visually, it must be said, is very close in core graphic settings, though there is a key difference. Speaking on visuals, the texture work and lighting appear very close to X. There's a difference in shadow positions which might suggest a different preset here, but it's a nitpick. The two though are ostensibly the same. Where there is a big divide though is in that all crucial resolution metric. The native resolution on Stadia is essentially 1440p based on my tests. The vertical axis always draws in 1440 pixels from every sample. And while I can't rule out dynamic resolution since we have seen it on PS4 Pro, it seems largely fixed at 2560 by 1440. What this means is, there's a bit of a gap in clarity next to Xbox One X which runs at a higher number, circulating around 1872p here. Again, there's a dynamic setup for X as it targets a full 4K, and so in all cases you're getting a higher resolution than Stadia. Okay, so it runs at a lower resolution than X, but surely we have an option to fix this. After all, Wolfenstein Youngblood is notable for offering a dynamic res toggle on console. I give this a shot on base PS4 and Pro. In the settings you can turn it off and get the highest target resolution, 1440p on Pro for example. Switch this on and it allows the renderer to drop resolution where it needs to salvage performance. Or, in failing that, the aggressive mode puts it at a low resolution constantly to give the best frame rates your machine can muster. It didn't quite solve base PS4's performance issues as we see here switching between them, but it's nice to at least have the option. As for Stadia, well, much in line with what I saw in Final Fantasy 15, any user tweakable settings are removed from the service. There's no way to get a better picture here, and equally nor is there a way to improve the frame rate. It's all a bit of a shame. So between the input latency and the lack of a real tangible boost to visuals, at least in resolution, it's hard to vouch for Stadia overall. Outside of the novelty of playing a visually cutting edge game on an Android phone perhaps, it's hard to see the payoff. That is outside of the convenience of avoiding a 38GB download on consoles, which is always Stadia's strength. Another plus is compression in Wolfenstein is surprisingly minimal in my experience, partly due to those often cleanly lit environments. The besieged town squares and underground layers with a metallic sheen compress really nicely. With a target of 60fps in mind, it's relatively low on macro blocking, so all good there. The frame rate business is curious too. At 1440p on Stadia, you'd presume it's been optimised to a fairly conservative setting to push for a better frame rate all round. Neither PS4 or Xbox One for that matter could lock to 60fps perfectly in our original tests. Even Xbox One X here seems to waver between 50 and 60fps with its dynamic resolution mode enabled. Aggressive may have solved this, but fundamentally it is a stretch for the system to get close to a 4K target and push a full 60fps. What we have on Stadia then isn't the all-out improvement I'd expected. We have one fixed mode to use here, but the reading isn't exactly locked. Overlooking the streaming stutters, the actual hardware level frame rate drops are noticeable. We're seeing drops into the 50s, interrupting a largely 60fps experience. Overall, the good news here is it's an improvement on Xbox One X, even if it's not perfect. The game simply doesn't drop as regularly. On that level, I think it's a small success, but I'd have loved to have seen Stadia running with a hypothetical aggressive mode enabled, to force that resolution lower. How might that have played? There's no telling at this point. The pairing of a 1440p picture and sub 60fps drops, though, with minimal settings upgrades on X, does seem disappointing on balance. For a machine that outranks all the consoles in pure horsepower, on paper, the results here simply don't show for it. My biggest takeaway from Wolfenstein on Stadia is how lag can affect different games in different ways. Within moments of picking up the pad, I felt hampered by that combination of fast, frenetic pace of play and the input delay of the stream. Even with the generous auto-aim, it's a struggle to get a good lock on the enemy. Now, you do adapt to it over time, but it's never ideal. And the speed of the controls is really at the heart of what makes this game great. So be warned going in. It's a bigger deal than most Stadia conversions, and Youngblood doesn't do enough otherwise to justify itself on the platform. Anyway, that'll do from me. If you did find this analysis useful or insightful in any way, please feel free to like or subscribe, and don't forget to hit the bell to get notifications as any new video lands. To get a pristine, high quality version of this video, check out our Patreon at digitalfoundry.net, and to get in direct contact with me or the team, just use Twitter. But from me for now, thanks for watching.
Just fucking go down.